Hello all, thank you so much for coming. This is Mike Marson from DynamicPoint. We have Ryan Clark here from Mr. SharePoint. Today we're going to be talking about SharePoint portals specifically targeted towards external users, so targeted towards your customers and vendors. We have Ryan joining us today. He's a Microsoft MVP as well as the Chief Solution Architect for Mr. SharePoint. And then I have myself, Mike Marson. I'm the Director of Business Development for DynamicPoint. And we're teaming up today to discuss or go through here over the next probably 45 minutes or so to an hour, not only how you could use SharePoint for an external sharing portal, but the benefits, and we'll dive into some of the details of how that's technically possible. So we'll keep it going here. As far as the agenda today, we're going to start off with Mr. SharePoint, hosted by Ryan. He's going to be going over why use SharePoint as a portal. He's also going to dive into external sharing and how that's configured within the Office 365 framework. And then he's going to go through a couple of the out-of-box SharePoint external collaboration features. I'm going to take it over from there and build on what Ryan introduced by introducing ERP and CRM data to your portal. So what DynamicPoint will be offering here is the inclusion of other information on your portal, building on that SharePoint framework. We're going to go through integrated ERP and CRM reports, as well as business automation using Power Automate workflows. So really building on what Ryan has introduced as far as the external collaboration features, and then building on that of how we could go ahead and incorporate additional data. And then for closing, we'll have some further reading as well as time after for Q&A. Just a bit of housekeeping, if you do have any questions or chat, we also have Richard from our team on the phone. He will be monitoring the chat as well as questions. So if you have anything, we're happy to sort of pause as we're going through it. So feel free to go ahead and put those through. And if we have a break in the action, we'll go ahead and address them. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Ryan here, and he's going to start off with how to use SharePoint as a portal. So please go ahead, Ryan.
Mike, I appreciate it, and thanks to you and the whole DynamicPoint team. Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Ryan Clark. I'll be talking about SharePoint as a portal. And why would we use SharePoint as a portal? So I have a few important points here. Number one would be the integration with Microsoft 365. So SharePoint is just one of many key platforms within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And Microsoft 365 in general provides many features and applications, some that we should all know of, right? Word, Excel, Teams, OneDrive, etc., and many more. So you get more than just SharePoint by being a part of Microsoft 365. It's also scalable and customizable, and it can be used fully out of the box, meaning that we just use components that Microsoft has allowed us to use, right, without any further customization. Really, we just would be doing configuration-based things, or it can be extended. SharePoint was built as a platform, so it was meant to be extended so we can customize it fully with custom solutions and applications. And it can be used by companies regardless of size. I've worked with organizations that have just one person to organizations that have tens of thousands of employees. It also improves communication and collaboration. So SharePoint makes it easier to provide users with access to the content they need. And what's most importantly is the content they need when they need it. Microsoft Teams, of course, is tightly coupled with SharePoint, and both can be leveraged. So you really can't have Microsoft Teams without a SharePoint site collection in the background. See if I can go to the next slide. There we go. It also supports personalization and content targeting. So content can be targeted to different audiences based upon a user's, for example, location, could be their division or their function within the organization, or it could even be their seniority in the business. And we can do that because so SharePoint leverages the simple but robust integration with Azure Active Directory. So that's Microsoft's user management tool. So anytime you have a user and or a guest inside of Azure Active Directory, you can leverage them inside of SharePoint as well. One important thing to note also is that SharePoint leverages now the modern experience. This means that we can build out-of-the-box SharePoint sites that are more attractive, much more appealing, easier to use and leverage, and there's an easier publishing experience compared to the original classic SharePoint experience. Now, for those of you that may have been using SharePoint before, the classic SharePoint experience is like 20 years old. And obviously Microsoft can't get rid of that now because many organizations still use it, but the modern experience is taking SharePoint by storm. And I see more and more organizations leveraging that fully. Next on the list here would be excellent permissions management. So obviously we can share content across site collections, sites, folders, and even at the item level. So we can get pretty granular when it comes to permissions management. We can also share content internally and externally, and it's very simple to do so. And like I mentioned before, it integrates with Azure Active Directory. We can also leverage conditional access policies, for example, where we can only allow people to access SharePoint if they're on a certified, organization-based device, or maybe they're logging in through a certain set of IP address ranges. We can be granular with that, and that's called conditional access policies. And lastly, SharePoint has a very healthy roadmap. Microsoft continues to invest heavily in the product, and that's a great sign. That only means that SharePoint is going to continue to get better from this point forward. All right, let's talk about external sharing. So SharePoint has two key sharing options for external users. The one that I'd like to talk about is just links that allow access to anyone that has that link. We have the ability to configure those links as well, where we can set editing and downloading criteria, right? So we can either enable or disable those. We can also set expirations on those links as well, and even add a password. And that's what that image on the right side is showing. So basically we can set these sharing links and basically allow people to download, not download, etc. So you can get pretty, particular with how you want to share your links. The other way that we can share SharePoint assets would be to explicitly grant access. This basically means that I'm going to allow a person to see a particular folder or a particular document, and I'm going to share it with them specifically. And this is typically done by using an email address and sharing it with that person directly. Once you do that, SharePoint sends a sharing invitation that a person must accept. Either that, or they may do what's known as a one-time passcode, where a person will get a code to their email. They must confirm that code, and then they can grant, they'll be given access to the content. Now, I have an important note at the bottom there that basically says that so users can be invited via SharePoint directly, like what I just mentioned, or we can leverage what's known as Azure Business to Business or B2B. And that can also be used in SharePoint. Essentially what that means is that we can create guest accounts inside of our Azure Active Directory structure. And then once that guest accepts their invite, we can then use them directly inside of SharePoint. What I found is that using Azure Business to Business is a cleaner user experience for external users. And if you have questions about that, I can delve into that a little bit further later on. So what about out-of-the-box SharePoint external collaboration features? So when we look at the SharePoint site collection features, or the SharePoint Administration Center rather, we have the ability to actually enable or disable external access at the site collection level. So you can't do it at a sub-site level, you can't do it at a document library level. It literally can be turned on or off, but it has to be done at the site collection level, and that's done via the SharePoint Admin Center. And this is the interface that you'll see via the image here on the right. So by default, you can set it to share with new and existing guests. We can have it set to existing guests only. We can share with anyone, right? That's the least restrictive set of permissions there. Or you can allow it to only be shared with people in your organization. Now, depending on what your business needs are, you may have a site collection that you want to open up to everyone externally, right? That could be things for like vendors or other types of things that you may be sharing externally. Or for internal things such as an intranet, you may only want it to be shared with people internally or inside of your organization. So you wouldn't necessarily want any external access. So we can restrict that again on a site collection level. And I mentioned this before, this is in the SharePoint Administration Center. If you look at the image on the right, we can see that we have the ability to set permissions that are most permissive or also least permissive. The cool thing is that when we talk about SharePoint and OneDrive, we have the ability to set those independently of each other. So in some instances, organizations will say, well, I want everybody that has access to OneDrive in my organization to be able to share their links, if it's internally or externally. So they'll set that to the anyone option there. However, for SharePoint, I've seen organizations that kind of drag this circle here down a little bit, and they'll either have it set to new and existing guests or existing guests, and that's how it would be set by default. But again, we could break it down per site collection. Now let's talk about default link sharing types. This is a great feature to understand because by default, we have the ability to set these permissions or this configuration inside of the SharePoint Admin Center. So by default, this basically means that when you go to create a sharing link, this is the default option that would be shown when you're actually trying to create that sharing link. So I've seen organizations set it to what I have here for only people in your organization. But if you have least restrictive access, requirements, then basically I see organizations set it to anyone with the link. And this is just the default setting. Again, if we were to go ahead and try to share something, we could always modify that as needed. And then there are also additional external sharing settings that I'd like to talk about. One of the biggest ones is if you're trying to share an asset or an object with a specific person who has a specific email address. There's an option here that's unchecked in this example, but a lot of times I would check it. It basically says that guests must sign in using the same account. Oops, let me go back. That must sign in with the same account to which sharing invitations are sent. Let me explain why this is important. If I was to share an asset or an object in SharePoint with a particular email address, and let's say that person that I shared it with was logged into inside of another Microsoft 365 organization. It's possible that if they click that link that I shared with them, they would actually log in using the wrong account. And a lot of times I have that option checked so that SharePoint will prevent that from happening. And it basically says, if you're not logging in with the email I shared it with, you're not going to be able to be given access. So that's something I always like to point out because I typically always enable that. And there's other options here, such as limiting external sharing by domain, for example. So if there's particular domains that you want to limit your sharing to, you can set those one by one. And then also, one other thing that I see many organizations taking advantage of is only allowing users to share if they're in particular groups. So we can limit who has the ability to share in general, because maybe most of the organization only needs to share internally. Maybe only want a few people to share externally. We could set that second checkbox here as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. Hand it back over to you, Mike.
All right, thank you, Ryan, for that. I'm going to go ahead and build on that. We're going to do a little bit of introduction of how we use these portals and how we could incorporate data. And then we're going to start looking at some. So I'm going to demo some various portals for you and give you a look and feel of how they can be used. And we could start talking about how they could be built on for business automation as well. So just a quick intro to DynamicPoint. DynamicPoint, our focus, and the reason we're pairing up here with Mr. SharePoint and Ryan is that our focus is really on these apps that extend Office 365 SharePoint. And today we're going to be talking about our portal app, and it's going to incorporate that information from ERP and CRM systems. Ryan's focus is on a SharePoint service provider. So basically we have a product company and a service company pairing up to give this presentation. We have a long history of which Ryan does as well. Obviously, back in the day, there was the on-premise version, which we probably all started on, not to date us, but the SharePoint on-prem products. And then before that, we actually did custom applications before SharePoint even came along. So we have a history moving our way up to what now is Office 365 and the whole suite of applications. So again, building on this concept set forth by Ryan, right? I have a SharePoint portal and I'm enabling external collaboration. And he just went through all of the different settings that I could do and how I could secure that sharing. And of course, I'm going to secure that sharing, not only with internal people, they probably already have access, but with customers and vendors coming into this collaboration portal. And then with that portal, I can now share all of the things that you would normally consider being SharePoint content, document libraries, wikis, blogs, video content, right? All of the, news links, all the things that you sort of consider being typical content that you would put on SharePoint. And then with our app, what we're going to give you the ability to is connect to external data. And that external data could really come from anywhere. It could come from a database or whatever else. More often than not, it's coming from ERP and CRM systems. And now that I have this whole framework, right, I have the external sharing, I have connectivity to my business data, we can now pull in the rest of these Office 365 features, including like Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, to further extend that solution and make it even more of a platform for not only 24/7 self-service, which is one of the main reasons that we set up a portal, but also for automating business processes. And I'm going to take you through a few examples of that. So objectives, really the objectives depend on the audience, obviously. If it's a customer portal, it's sort of usually, the obvious things. I want them to manage company information, maybe share contracts and agreements, maybe take orders, right? Place orders and do order entry, share inventory or product details, accept payments, help desk and service tickets. On the vendor side, it's pretty much the flip of that, right? I'm obviously not going to do sales orders, but maybe I'd want them to see and confirm purchase orders or do vendor terms and conditions, manage company information. RFP management is a big one, right? Responding to RFPs, being able to complete documentation, submit it in a timely manner, et cetera. as well as shipments. And then on the employee side, it's obviously more internal facing to the organization. External sharing is not that important in that realm because they're probably already internal employees, but such things as employee forms and handbooks, time entry, project management, reporting, etc. All right, let's get out of PowerPoint and we are going to go look at portals. I have all kinds of examples to walk you through, so I'm gonna give you different ideas here to sort of get your wheels turning on what may be applicable for you. I'm gonna start off with a customer portal. That seems to be the typical use case or more common one. Vendor portals are also, I'd say, a close second. Here we have that modern site that Ryan was talking about. This is modern SharePoint site, which also means it's responsive. And I have different calls to action here. I have my ability to look at sales orders, maybe enter new orders, look at invoices and pay them. And we'll go into these in a bit of detail here in a bit. Create returns, service orders, create new, manage contracts, update company information, update my profile, contact me, as well as I have an integrated Power BI report here. So this is using the fact that the user is authenticated to show them Power BI information that is applicable to this user. And what I mean by that is a SharePoint extranet is not open, right? It's not public. If I were to hit this URL in a private session here, you're going to see it's going to ask me to log in. So by that nature, I am authenticated and I know who's in this portal. So when I could present something such as a reseller scorecard, I could filter that information for that authenticated user. And then they, of course, could interact with it and drill down further. Taking that same approach of knowing who they are, I'm also filtering documents. So they're seeing contracts and statements of works, but it's filtered for that specific user. And then here I just have a simple event calendar of what's coming up. So again, this is a customer portal. If I were to look at the idea of a vendor portal, same idea, different data, right? Purchase orders, contracts, historical invoices, not AR invoices, of course, AP invoices. Maybe submitting questions and things like that. So before I go into the functionality, let's talk a little bit about look and feel, because look and feel, of course, is important. We want our portal to be, user-friendly and attractive to the users. And SharePoint gives me all kinds of different ways to do that. The modern sites are already, pretty attractive, but Microsoft offers this thing called a lookbook. And what this lookbook allows me to do is browse through templates and then download these. And these are all free, right? This is just a public site here, lookbook.microsoft.com. And it gives me different inspirations of what I want my external portal or collaboration site to look like. And of course, you don't have to use any of these. These are just sort of templates to get you started. And if I were to pick any of these, I could go ahead and add it directly to my tenant and it'll add that site and create it for me, giving me a head start. Right? But again, there's no obligation to do that. You could just use it for inspiration and then, go create your own. All right, so now let's start diving into the details of what I could do with a collaboration portal like this. So I'm going to click on sales orders and we're going to start off with sort of a simple example and work our way up in complexity. If I were to click on sales orders, what is occurring is, again, it knows who I am and it is looking for the sales orders in my ERP or CRM system that are open for this given customer. So the customers come into the portal, they want to see their sales orders. They want to drill into the orders. Maybe they want to look at things like status or pricing or drill into line items and see if things have been shipped, see if there's a tracking number associated to it. So it's giving them that real interface or window into their ERP data. An important thing to know here, I use that term window. We're not storing a single thing here, right? We're not replicating any of your data to SharePoint or anything like that. The portal product is giving you that connectivity to that information that resides in an ERP system, a database, a CRM, etc. So it is really giving me that connectivity without the need for replication. All of those calls that you see are in fact live queries of that data. Secure live queries, right? Because of course we're only showing the information that is applicable to that authenticated user. So I start simple, right? I could see data, I could look at the status, I could do filters and do all that other kind of stuff, but maybe I want to print an order. So if I click this print icon here, what's going to occur is actually going to call the underlying ERP report and show me a sales order. And it's rendering it as a PDF. The reason we pick an EDF, of course, is they're very portable. I could save them, I could print them. Every browser in this day and age knows how to handle a PDF. Every mobile device knows how to handle a PDF, right? So by clicking on that, I'm actually calling the underlying sales order report in the ERP and allowing the user to generate that in real time. So why would I do that? I don't have to, send these out, or if someone calls and says, hey, can I get another copy of it? I'm no longer emailing them. They could go print it whenever the heck they want at their leisure. All right, so like I said, start simple, make our way forward, right? I'm gonna look at that same idea of interacting with sales orders, but in this one I have more permissions set up on how I interact with the data. If you notice here, I have more buttons. I have the ability to edit data as well as submit these for review, and I have a create button. By clicking on this, it's actually calling the underlying ERP business logic and presenting the create transaction to my customers. So now they could go in there, create an order. If you notice, it's defaulting all of their business logic, all of their customer information, such as their buy to and their sell to, and all the things I have set up in their ERP system. As well as if I were to go add items, I'm gonna get items directly out of my inventory. So I could go add, bikes and quantities and things like that and create these and add this directly to a sales order in the portal. So who is this good for? If you think about it, this is really good for B2B relationships, right? It's not an Amazon, e-commerce experience. It's much more targeted towards B2B relationships where I'm not only sharing the sort of standard things that SharePoint offers, such as content like contracts and documents and things like that, but then underlying ERP data and enabling functions in a B2B relationship. And if you notice, Microsoft is big on that B2B sharing when it comes to SharePoint. They have these B2B sharing invites and all kinds of functionality as far as permissions and inviting people into the system that are geared towards those business-to-business relationships. So that was create an order. Let's go ahead and look at invoices. The interesting thing about invoices is usually I want people to pay them, right? That's nice if customers pay their invoice. So in addition to viewing and printing it, I have a pay icon here. Now, if I click that pay icon, what we're gonna do is call a payment service. Payment services that we've probably all heard of are the ones like Stripe and PayPal, and we're gonna integrate that such that I could accept payment directly in the portal. Now, I'm not gonna fill this out because unfortunately I don't have $3,600 for the sake of a demo, but what you could see is it put all the information from that order and I could go ahead and accept that payment directly in the portal, but using a popular third-party payment service such as like a Stripe. This happens to be Stripe, but we also integrate with PayPal and Authorize.net and the other providers. All right, what else? So that's invoices, contracts, managing my company information. After a while, you could sort of see that really any of the data is available, and I'm gonna become a little bit of a broken record here. But what this allows me to do is, update my company information, say my company moved for some reason. I want to go ahead and update that. And that's going to go ahead and generate notifications. I have the ability to print a customer statement here. So all just different examples of the same thing, right? Generating various reports as well as integrating with different data points. So let's skip over to the vendor portal. Vendor portal, like I said, is usually sort of a customer portal, but the flip side, right? It's the accounts payable side as opposed to the accounts receivable side. If I go through here, as opposed to showing such things as sales orders, I'm gonna show purchase orders. Probably not gonna give my vendors the ability to create purchase orders, right? That would be nice, but that's probably not realistic, but maybe I want them to acknowledge it, update delivery dates, and give them that sort of collaboration. As well as if I print this, of course, it's gonna go ahead and call a PO report as opposed to a sales order report. And if I submit this, what it's actually gonna do is submit documentation. So in addition to viewing documents, you could also upload documents in the portal. That comes in handy if, I'm showing purchase orders. If these were quotes and I wanted to accept RFP responses and things like that to quotes, I could go ahead and browse to my computer, upload the file, and submit those, and do those things with such things as invoices as well. So it could be documentation that my vendors are providing me, whether it be technical documentation, RFP responses, but also things like invoices. All right, let's talk about, actually, let's pause for a sec. So that's all the things on the vendor side. Again, invoices, managing data. So you guys probably get the idea of what's possible there. Let's go ahead and take it back to a quick slide and talk about where we're going to go next. So everything I've been talking about is this concept of I want a portal for, self-service. I want people to be able to log in, see information, interact with that data, potentially create transactions, etc. So generating reports, data sharing, etc. So now I have this framework, I could start introducing a little bit more complexity in features and workflows. So if someone interacts with that data, I could kick off a workflow. I could send notifications. I could begin introducing entire business automation using this portal as a platform and pulling in Office 365 functionality, right? Power Automate is Microsoft's workflow tool. I could pull in those. I could pull in forms for various interactions, connections to other systems, etc. And I have a couple examples to walk you through. One, let's take vendor onboarding. Right, I have a new vendor, I want to do business with them, I'm going to request a notification to be sent to that vendor to fill out forms and do some onboarding forms. They're going to get that invitation, they're going to fill out their forms, they're going to give me tax information such as 1099 documentation, anything I want them to fill out. And then I want some workflow. I want that vendor to be created in the ERP, I want that vendor to be welcomed, I want them to be shared the portal, etc. So taking this process that would be otherwise, mostly managed on email and introducing workflow and a portal as a framework to begin automating that entire process using the Microsoft tools. That's one I'll show. The next one will be from a customer side. Same idea, but as opposed to vendor onboarding, we're going to talk about customer contract renewal. I have a contract expiring. I want to send them a notification, bring them into a contract, obtain such things as electronic signatures, as well as maybe some information on that contract. And then I want that contract to automatically update some underlying data, such as the expiration date in the ERP, as well as send the customer a notification saying, congratulations, we're on for another year or whatever the period of the contract is. So let's look at this. Let's get back out of PowerPoint. And let's start with vendor onboarding. So I put a link here to request a new vendor. And this would probably be initiated by someone, within the company, like a purchasing manager or someone like that who wants to do business with a new vendor. And you can see this is actually just an integrated form, right? So again, we're talking about bringing Office 365 functionality into SharePoint and Portal. So here I just have a simple form, right? It says right here, powered by Microsoft Forms. And I'm going to put the vendor name and the vendor email. Obviously, I could probably, make that a little bit more complete and put some more data in, but for the sake of demonstration, I just want to initiate a request to this vendor. So what that is going to do is kick me off a workflow, and I'm going to pretend to be the vendor here. So obviously, I was the person initiating the request, and now I'm going to pretend to be this proposed vendor. What you're going to see here is that kicked off a workflow and actually integrated with a DocuSign contract. Is there other integrations? Absolutely. DocuSign, of course, is a popular one. It gives me the ability to obtain information, electronic signatures, etc. So that's why I'm using Power Automate to initiate this task. So it's called a DocuSign template, of which I could click on. And now me as a proposed vendor could fill out this new vendor request form. So I just put a couple fields in here, not to bore anyone and watch me type, but this is my new vendor request form. Of course, they could fill this out, or capture whatever information I need about them, NDAs, all those other things that may be required. And I've put the W-9, right? And sometimes I'll give them the ability just to upload it if they have one, but otherwise they could fill it out online. Of course, they're going to fill in their, tax ID number and all that other good stuff. And I want to capture their electronic signature. So that was the first step in the workflow, right? I initiated it, kicked it off to the vendor does their part, they finish it. So now what's going to happen is after them finishing the vendor, proposed vendor, I should say, right? Because I'm onboarding them. I'm going to do an internal review. And what that means is someone within my company is going to get a notification. So that'll come through here in a second. As that's actually coming through, we could look at, here's a few of the other notifications that were generated by the portal. So as I was clicking around, I was also kicking off notifications. So here's what my vendor changed, if you recall me changing that delivery date. So you could see that highlighted, right, as far as what the vendor modified. And then I also updated a quote. So I got a copy of that. Okay, so here's my new vendor request. And as you can see, what this is using is a Power Automate approval task to grant me a review of that request that I just put in. So of course I could click to this and drill into that request, right? So this is what my vendor filled out. Say, yep, that all looks good. And then I could approve or reject this request for a new vendor. So this is a Power Automate approval task, right? If you're not familiar with these things are very portable. I'm looking at it from Outlook, but if I were to go into Teams and look at my tasks here or my approvals, you're gonna see, and I also got a desktop notification, so you can see that coming up. But you can see I would see all my approvals and all my workflow directly from Teams interfaced as well. So it's really up to you on how you wanna manage these, right? I could click in here and do it. Of course, there's the mobile app if you prefer to do it from your phone. But again, I could link to that completed form and then say, this looks good. We're ready to onboard this vendor. Approve it. The workflow will now continue, right? So I initiated a request, I sent it to the proposed vendor, I reviewed it from an internal, procurement manager perspective, and now the vendor is going to be a last person on the chain, and they're going to get an invitation, of which I didn't spend too much time making this pretty, of course, so please forgive me for that. But you could brand these, of course. This is you're now a vendor in our system. To access the portal, click the following link, and voila, right? So the vendor's onboarded, I gave them forms, and now I've granted them access to the portal using those external sharing features, which could also be called from Power Automate. So I used those sharing features that Ryan introduced and initiated the link to the portal. Take that idea, let's apply that to a customer. Customer wants to look at their contracts and initiate a renewal. Now, in all honesty, a renewal, I'd probably not ask my customer to request it. I would probably send this to them in an email using a workflow. But for the sake of a demo, it's hard for me to wait for time to pass. So I'm actually going to request a renewal from looking at the contract in the portal. So I'm going to pick one of these. I could look at the expiration date there is, December. And we'll just go ahead and pick that one for the fun of it and request a renewal. Renewal in my world is not just clicking a button. I need to get this person to sign a contract, maybe review some terms and conditions. So you can see here they received a new email. You will receive an email with further information. You can close the screen. Again, pretending to be this customer. And again, I have initiated a DocuSign contract here for my renewal. So this is the customer now received this notification. I could click on this. It's going to be the renewed contract in front of them. I've just used our end user license agreement. They could go ahead and accept that. And by accepting that, I'm going to go ahead and finish it. And it's going to go again and follow the same type of process as before. Go to someone for an internal review, saying, hey, does this contract look good? So if I give it a second, I would see that come through. And then upon that approval being initiated, I'm going to notify the customer that their renewal has been accepted. So we don't have to wait. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I was growing impatient. So that's the completed copy that I received, but I should be getting another task saying, hey, review this customer's onboarding. That's okay, we have one right here. So here's the contract renewal request. Again, using the Power Automate approval. Again, a link to the completed form. So this is just further internal controls. And I could go ahead and approve it and say this looks good. And in this case, as opposed to inviting the vendor to the portal like I did on the vendor example, They're going to get a contract is renewed, a link, thank you so much for extending another term. And if I were to go back to the contract, I intentionally left that contract tab up. If you notice here, my expiration date is still December, but if I were to refresh this screen, it's going to requery that information from the system of record being the ERP, and then I should see, a contract updated here in a second. And sometimes it takes a second to update, but we will see that refreshed with the new expiration. So that is business automation examples. So there's a lot we could do. Those are just some ideas to get your wheels turning there. Let's go ahead and turn it back to the slides here.
Hey, Mike.
So, yeah, go ahead.
There were a couple of questions.
Please.
Those by you now.
Take us through them.
So the first one was you had shown a sales order in the portal. The question is this sales order an embed from another system or a Power App?
Good question. So it's actually not a Power App. What we have created at DynamicPoint is a add-in to SharePoint that allows you to integrate with data from other sources. And generally speaking, that data is coming from ERP and CRM systems. So it's not so much an embed, we're actually calling the web services of ERP systems using an add-in that we've created that is hosted by SharePoint that allows that connectivity, as well as introduces the security and the filtering of what information that user sees and other things like calling reports and whether or not they have view or edit permission or things like that.
Okay. And then the next question came up, what about Power Pages?
Ooh, good question. So Power Pages is sort of the new one from Microsoft, right? And that's the ability to create pages and integrate them into your portal. And that's a great option to extend this. And the other thing is Power Pages give you connectivity to the Dataverse, right? So you could create applications and store data. So I think that's great, because then you could use these Power Pages and extend your portal. Generally speaking, from the connectivity that we're doing, it's coming from an ERP system or a database. So you can't necessarily use those interchangeably, because the portal is connecting to an ERP system, and then you're going to do a Power Page which will store data in like the Dataverse as its repository. But it could very much be a good complement, right? Because then I could introduce new functionality that maybe is not inherent to my ERP, like if I want to track service cases and I'm not using that in my system.
And that was it?
But those are really good. Yeah, I mean, I obviously didn't go through all of that, but I mean, you could introduce Power Apps as well, right? I could have Power App functionality. I could do Power Page functionality. We talked a little bit about Power BI and form integration. There's all these tools that now I have this platform. The external sharing is there. The security is there. The ERP integration is there, and the data is like I could really use this platform to build a portal to do a lot of various things. And it's almost hard to wrap your head around how much options you have as far as what you want to do with that portal. And but there are a lot of options. So just some further reading, and by the way, you should see in your handouts, we've uploaded this presentation so you guys could download it. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, neither Ryan or I could take credit for inventing this, right? This is very much being introduced by Microsoft with their B2B sharing. And that first link, actually first and second, is talking about how you do this, right? And what is the features and functionality within Office 365 and SharePoint to enable these portals. So those are the first two. The second ones are both of our blogs. So you'll see a Mr. SharePoint blog, of which Ryan has published all kinds of good information about SharePoint in general and features and functionality and this whole external sharing. He's got a great blog on how you set this up with more detail, obviously, than we could cover today in today's webinar. And then the DynamicPoint blog too. The DynamicPoint, like I said, we're going to be more product focused because that's our offering. And Ryan's page is going to be much more tips and tricks on what you could do in SharePoint. So I believe that was it as far as our agenda for today. And other than thank you everyone for your time today, and here's our contact information if you guys have any further questions. Otherwise, we'll let you get back to your day, and thank you, Ryan and Richard and everyone for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care, guys. Have a great day.
Have a good one.
Bye now.